Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Flash, as well as the latest episode of Legends of Tomorrow. Like always, if I'm talking about something you want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below. I include the time when I start talking about each of the respective shows. So for example, if you want to hear what I say about this week's episode of The Flash, you can skip to what I say about this week's episode of Legends of Tomorrow. But the first thing I'm going to talk about is this week's episode of The Flash. Actually, a very fantastic episode of Flash. Like, overall, like, it's not like a very action-packed episode, but I love what this story did. Like, this episode broke down our villain, introduced us, really get to know the Thinker. Obviously, first introduction to his name, and got to see just how much of a grand scale this battle is going to be, how much of an uphill battle this is going to be for Barry, because it obviously picks up where last week's episode left off. They're meeting with DeVoe, and it turns out the lady is kind of like his assistant. It is in fact his wife. Her name is Marlise. And nevertheless, but like Barry is the only one that's like, there's something about this guy, just something don't feel right. It's got to be him. It's got to be him. But like, and no one else on the team is 100% certain because everyone follows through. They look in his background. Cisco even vibes him. I'm like, dude, they're covering this up. Like, how do you block? How do you block Cisco's vibe? That's how they found out about Hunter Zolomon. That's how you found out was when, for sure when Cisco vibed Jay's helmet and saw, Zoom taking them off to be Hunter. And I was like, but for him to block it, so it's just like, oh, they're having dinner. And that's what I love about this episode, because it made Barry look worse and worse. It made Barry look crazy. Because to me, I thought they were going to keep this up, because I thought the point was basically, well, initially my thought was, okay, the point is to make Barry look crazy and it cause a big divide between him and the team. So that basically Barry goes more rogue. He kind of handles things on his own more and more. And obviously, like, his strength is his friends. That's kind of something that DeVoe kind of talks about. But it's like that being his strength, and that eventually, him going off on his own would eventually kind of lead him weaker. So easier for the Thinker to even quickly dispatch of him or something like that. But it seems like more so than anything, it was all a means of messing with him, setting Barry up to be like, oh, like he knew that Barry would break into his house, like Barry getting pushed further and further. He's got the board he used to have for his mom's case is now all about DeVoe, which you have like Iris being like, what are you doing? Seeing is telling, like, there's a restraining order against Barry. Seeing ends up suspending him because there was a camera that caught him in the house, which immediately my brain goes, well, the fact is Barry was off using his super speed, but none of that was caught on camera. It's like, oh, he was here 1 second, then was going the next. I really appreciate when he broke into the house and that picture falling. Like, normally you're like, oh my God, that's going to suck. But it's like, you're the Flash. You can fix it and hide in an instant, which also reminds me, it's like, because I was like, oh, why didn't they show anything about Barry just zipping around? But I'm like, well, Barry's faster now too. Not only was he super fast before, he's even faster now. So to him, it's like in a blink of an eye. So probably in the time it would take to go from like this, what's like, I'm not even, is it called a millisecond? I've never known what the increment of time below a second is called. But Barry moves so fast, it won't even look like he actually moved on camera. So, but it's just a little precarious that they just happen to have cameras and he just happened to catch Barry. I mean, I guess you could also say that's on Barry's fault for not examining the place. I mean, it never came up in conversation, but you would think Barry would be, but then again, Barry's not in his right state of mind. He's just so like adamant about taking this guy down. And it's something he ends up talking about that Iris that I quickly was like, well, I'm not too surprised. Well, for one, we kind of already know that Barry's very obsessive. We already knew he's very obsessive about his mom's case. That was just all, hence the whole board. This is actually, I think this is the first thing he subsequently has done. Like, because they brought it up earlier this season. Oh, yeah, you don't have your mom's board anymore. It's like, no, I don't. Why would I? The case has been solved. But now I'm thinking, like, this is like he hasn't used that board for now. And I think that shows you the significance of this, that he has a board ready like that and everything. But the thing is, and it's something that Barry kind of alludes to, is like the fact is he has more to lose this time. And that's what scares him. Like, they faced everything before now, but like he feels like DeVoe's more dangerous because two people warned him. Savitar and Abracadabra warned, saying that DeVoe was going to be easily one of Barry's greatest foes. And because the thing of the matter is, it's based on what's happened before. Every time Barry goes up against like a tough villain, he loses something. With Reverse Flash, he lost his mom and his dad's freedom. With Zoom, he lost his dad. With Savitar, he almost lost Iris, but they lost HR instead. It's just, now with everything that's happening, like, everything is good. It's because everything is good, everything is perfect. And this is the moment where things typically go bad for Barry. I think that's another way of kind of looking at it. And it's just like, it's so crazy to think about the fact is that he's so much into Barry's head to the point he's like, yo, stop hiding it. Am I talking to Barry Allen or am I talking to the Flash? It's like, dude, I don't have to hide anymore. I'm going to let you know what's up. Why? Because I'm so smart, you won't be able to stop me. You're the fastest man alive, sure, but I have the fastest mind. I was like, that's actually really dope. This is like a villain that Barry's never faced before. He's never faced anyone with such a high intellect, someone that can maneuver him, who is not just one, not two, not 20, not 100, 1,000 moves ahead, thinking of every single possibility, because his brain, like, because I would love because we basically end up seeing his backstory in this episode, which I really appreciate. I also like when the particle accelerator went off, like the raindrops like stopped and then like reversed. I was like, that's so cool. I don't remember them doing that back in season 1, like obviously at the beginning, but maybe they did. I'm not remembering. It's been a long time since I've seen season 1. Remember that was like 2014 when that happened, when that aired. But nevertheless, I love that moment too when Wells is up there getting the particle accelerator ready, and Marlise is like, aren't you worried about other things going wrong? He's like, no, wait a minute, DeVoe. So that must be your husband, Clifford DeVoe. He's like, I'm a big fan. I'm like, right, you're Eobard, you duplicitous bastard. I was like, right. Of course you're going to know exactly who he is, Mr. I'm from the future and everything. Cause wasn't that Abracadabra's deal too? Abracadabra was from the future as well, right? Him and Savitar are both from the future, so obviously they would know. I mean, especially considering the fact that Savitar is Barry too, so there's that whole situation, so. But it's like, oh, he's like, basically, oh, don't worry. Like, he's like, I'm a big fan of your work. It's like, oh, I can't wait for the future. And it's like, I wonder, does at this point in time, DeVoe know that was him? Like, because obviously everything took place like 4 years ago, but I'm curious in how much of that time, like, has the course of the series taken place? Like, it never updated you being like, oh, this happened a year ago. So I don't know whether everything that we saw in his past was from, 4 years ago, meaning he's been planning this for 4 years or what? Because basically him and his wife, he came up with the concept of it. She's like, and it's something Barry talked about, she's like a mechanical genius, which I thought was going to play a part in this episode. I was like, how did you get around the metahuman scanner? I was like, I don't get it. Like, how would that not be there? But then I'm like, okay, she's a mechanical genius. Right? I was like, okay, maybe she built like a mechanical body. It's like, maybe DeVoe's not even really alive anymore. Maybe she like built a like replica of him in a robot form to kind of live out, kind of pretend like her husband's still alive. I was like, or maybe she implanted his brain after his body died. That's what the whole thing was. I thought, no, it turns out that not being the case. It does seem like she is the one that built the chair that he has. Obviously, the device known as the thinking cap, which basically combined with the dark matter from the particle accelerator made him as smart as he is. But it has a ramification that it is actually killing him. It left him paralyzed and everything. So, and it's something that I like, because Barry's like, oh, she's got to be a part of this. And Iris is like, what? They're super villain team? And it's like, it seems like that's the case. Because especially because this episode added more context to the relationship too. Because like I said, it almost seemed like she was an assistant. I was like, oh, she's not actually his wife. It's like, no, she is. Like, she's the one that actually helped him along the way. It seemed like she was just taking orders. But the reason why she was scared is because it's like, no, we can't let everything that we've worked so hard for be undone. All that we've done, all that we've sacrificed. I'm not about to lose you. Because he is kind of like, well, just let me die. That's what kind of made me think like, oh, the whole robot thing. Turns out not to be the case. So it was most likely her who built the machine, because she's the mechanical genius, the robot samurai. So he's the one with like all knowledge in the world, which I also love that line of like, oh, the Council of Wells, you think they can stop me? You could get smart people from every world out there, basically in the multiverse, and they will not be able to come close. I'm like, dude, he's so good, because he's a villain that Barry can't do anything about, because he's got this persona of just being a nice guy. And like, everything so far paints Barry in a bad light. Like I said, I was thinking they were going to keep this up a little bit. It would have been interesting if they basically made it seem like Barry was crazy, especially that camera thing. It's like, I was like, especially when Barry got the camera and then he didn't go immediately to tell everyone about it, because it was all because they knew like the buttons had already been pushed. They knew that Barry would kind of go off on his own trying to find any evidence. But the moment that came, because I was like, oh my God, Barry heard the camera. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I was like, oh, did they slip up? It's like, no, there are no slip ups when it comes to the thinker. He knew that he made sure that Barry heard it. I was like, it had never been discovered this entire time that helmet's been there. It's been there since episode 1, and it's only now that Barry hears it. Like, I don't know why I was an idiot to think that. It's like, no, it's part of the plan. And they shut the camera down. I was like, well, it was never activated. Well, Barry, you're acting a little crazy. Especially because even Caitlin's like, well, didn't we promise we wouldn't go to jumping to conclusions about villains? But once again, it's because Barry's like, no, we're on top of it. We got an upper hand. Every other villain caught them by surprise, whether it's, as I mentioned, Savitar, Zoom, as well as Reverse Flash, all caught them by surprise. It's like, this time we know who he is. It's like, well, now we do know who he is. But at the end of it, will it matter? Because even he's like, well, the fact of the matter is, you can't stop me. You've actually already lost because everything Barry's doing is playing into his plans, and he's seeing. And that's the thing. Like, I'm so curious because ultimately that will be the question. Like, is Barry fast enough to outmatch his brain thinking on such a cosmic, not on a cosmic level, but on such a almost borderline cosmic level. But then again, once again, there's a whole aspect of the Speed Force. It's a cosmic thing. So I don't know. I'm still also waiting for like ramifications for what happened to Barry coming out of the Speed Force. I'm so curious to find out what it's all about. I assume that this is all about, it has to be about doing something about fixing him. Maybe he needs enough energy to fix himself, and that includes all the different metahumans. I still have no idea. All those metahumans have dark matter in their bodies, and it's like dark matter helped make him the way he is. So they're all keys. They're all pieces to a bigger puzzle, and I just can't figure out where they all fit in. I even like the fact that he's like, well, out of the countless possibilities, there was even one point that like they were going to name him the teacher, which he was like, oh, I think that's kind of interesting. He was out, that was funny. And it's like, but he's letting Iris and Barry go ahead and have their wedding because it's like, oh, kind of let them have a little happiness. It's almost making it seem like let them be happy so I can strip it away from them. But it's like, what are you after? What is the point of this? Like, to me, it's like you wouldn't think like someone that's just super smart would be such. I don't know. Like, I just never thought about it before because it's never really ever come up before in this show as well. I don't think. Eobard's smart. It's a combination of him being. He actually is like a pretty smart person. Plus the fact is he has future knowledge, but it does come from the fact is he's also pretty smart. Barry's never gone up against super intelligent enemies before, and he's always had his team to back him up. He's got like super smart people. He's got Harry, he's got the Council of Well, he's got Cisco and Caitlin. But it's like maybe that won't be enough against this guy. And I'm so curious to see how this all plays out, I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of episodes like this going forward in the sense of like who the thinker is, like how he will basically dismantle Barry's life bit by bit to kind of turn everything upside down. It's like when Barry thinks he's making a move in the right direction, it's like, well, I already saw this coming and I've already moved 1,000 steps before you. And it's so cool. That's why I'm saying this episode is so good. It's not like it's super action packed or anything, but it's just what it delivered. It delivered our bad guy understanding who he is and showing you just how he maneuvered around and manipulated Barry in this episode to make Barry look like a complete another idiot. So we also had the return of Wally, which is great because it's like we're going to need everyone to come together. But even together, like, will two speedsters be enough to take this guy down? With all of them working together, will it be enough? And I don't know. Because like the point I was bringing up earlier is like the fact is what I would think is that Barry would have to basically move at such a fast speed that he can outmaneuver DeVoe. That seems like his only option in the sense of like move, like the moment DeVoe is able to think of something else, Barry's going to have to make a move faster than he can think. So it's like, whereas maybe DeVoe is 1,000 steps ahead, Barry has to be 1,001 steps ahead with his speed and doing something to stop this. So because this means he's able to predict Barry's movements to like a crazy amount of degree. It's like, oh, you're going to come from this direction. I already have a trap set up for you to fall into it this way. So like, I'm so interested to see where this all goes. Obviously, next week's episode is going to be about the whole 2-night crossover event. It seems like from the previews I caught, it is dealing with Barry and Iris's wedding. So that's pretty cool. Like, that's going to play a part in that story. So I doubt the Thinker will continue. Like, obviously, that'll be the episode after the crossover that really dives deeper into all of that. But still, I'm super excited not only to see what goes down in the crossover event. I'm like super excited. It's like it got like roughly a week or so now to wait. Technically less than a week at this point. So 6 to 7 days, but nevertheless, I'm super excited about that. But I'm also curious to get back to just the Flash too, in this sense of like what's going to go down. I think technically this is Barry's first time going up against a team essentially. of villains. Like obviously the Legends dealt with the Legion of Doom, but like everyone Barry's ever gone up against has always been one off. I mean, there's the whole alchemy and Savitar situation, but even that's kind of still a one-off thing because that was like Savitar just in control. But more often his villains have been by himself, but now he's up against one person who's a mechanical genius and one who's just super smart, can see so many steps ahead. So like I said, I'm very interested to see where the rest of the season takes us with all of this. And I'm sure it's also going to continue with Barry still being in hot water with singing and everything. He did get suspended for 2 weeks, and I'm sure that's definitely not going to help Barry going forward because it's like, well, I don't know. It doesn't seem like it's just like, oh, the humiliate Barry. It seems like that was probably a means to get him out of the way for something else as well. But like I said, we will just have to wait and see. And now moving on to this week's episode of Legends of Tomorrow, another great episode. Sadly, in this episode, we had Sarah still being in a coma. Wasn't expecting that to happen. Wasn't expecting her kind of be out of commission. And this kind of leaves the teams kind of their own devices in this episode. But obviously, the main overall plot is the fact is they're tracking down an anachronism in 1967 in Vietnam. That anachronism turns out to be Grodd, which I thought was kind of interesting. I was like, how did that happen? Because I was trying to remember, how did Grodd's situation end? And it's like Grodd was left here. Argus obviously locked him up, and that's what Ray kind of comments on too, which kind of caught Zari's attention. She was like, wait, Argus? He's like, I know you have bad blood with them, but it's like, I mean, the fact of the matter is who Grodd is, all he's done, all the damage he's done, like, they try to set him off somewhere else, and what he do? He did nothing but cause problems on Earth too, and now he tried to come back and attack Central City last season. So, but it was like, it makes you wonder how did the whole anachronisms work? I mean, obviously it's just kind of like, well, I guess you imagine it kind of like a time hole opens up and snatches someone kind of falls through and they end up there. I guess it's kind of like a breach. I guess it kind of works similarly to that because we've actually never seen what it looks like when an anachronism is born, like when things kind of fall into place to let that happen, where something's pulled from one time period and brought to a different one. Essentially, he's kind of bringing all the stuff to an end, like all the fighting, like between, you know, the different soldiers, and to him, like, you know, some of the people that are there are treating him like a god, which kind of feeds into, you know, Grodd's ego a little bit of wanting to be like a god. And essentially, he's like, oh, I'm gonna bring peace, but Gideon shows that he ends up helping start World War III. Because, you know, Grodd, like, he's, and it's an interesting thing that Amaya kind of learns from this episode, that Grodd wasn't born a monster. He was just like any other gorilla until he was experimented on and created into what he is. You know, that, you know, and all he wants is the world to be at peace. But for him, it's like certain steps, sacrifices have to be made to ensure that. This Grodd almost seems a little different from the one that was in The Flash. I guess at that time he was so consumed by his rage. I mean, we don't know at what point in time in the timeline that this is Grodd. I'd assume that this is him after, you know, last season, like after his failed attack, you know, after the whole Gorilla City situation, wanting to actually make this a gorilla planet. But I didn't even think about it at the time, like Rise of the Planet of the Apes. The Planet of the Apes. It's kind of very similar thing. Makes you wonder, is that kind of the inspiration for Grodd's story in general? Like, I mean, not just in the show, just in the comic books in general when it comes to DC. Was that like the inspiration for his, like, the Planet of the Apes movies? I'm curious. I mean, they were actually books first, weren't they? Or am I totally full of crap? I actually don't remember. I could swear they're books, but maybe they're just movies. The point I'm making is he seemed a lot more volatile when it came. I mean, he was a little volatile this episode, but he seemed a lot more easily angered during the whole Flash thing last season. So it's like, it makes me think like this might be him at a different point in his timeline. Much like Dark last season, obviously that was him like from the 80s rather than the version. I mean, obviously this Dark we're dealing with now is a Dark that died back in season 4 of Arrow. So, but I'm curious. I would assume that the whole point is to get the more recent version of them that we know. I think that's kind of how it's going to work for everybody in this particular setup, but I could be completely wrong about it. But nevertheless, he's just looking for more peace and everything. So it's just, to him, it's like, we have to take these necessary steps. It might be bad along the way. Some people might die, but ultimately it will all end with peace, because humans are very violent, destructive creatures. And, you know, he's always seen the worst side of humans. Obviously, you have people like Caitlyn, and obviously in this case, Amaya, being able to speak to that other side of him, showing him that humans are more than just being destructive. And she ends up using the totem to kind of speak to him, and almost worked, but sadly things didn't work out that way. It is interesting to know. I mean, obviously at the end you have Dark recruiting him like that, and just him and Dark like talking to him and everything. It's like, dude, it's like, are we restarting the Legion of Doom to a certain extent? Because we're getting all these bad guys. We got Dark, we got Grodd. It's like, who else is going to join this little merry band? Not unless we do some Merlin stuff again. I mean, granted, we still don't know what his situation is outside of that whole Lee and Yu situation last season. He's one of the people we still know nothing about, as well as, I forgot her name. Who's the girl that's essentially Artemis, as well as Nissa and Talia. We have no idea where they stand, but obviously that's Arrow, this is Legend, so we'll just kind of focus on that. So, I mean, who else is going to join this merry band of bad guys under Mollus's thrall? Because it's something interesting that Zari kind of points out this episode that I hadn't really brought to the conclusion yet, but Stein ended up meeting like his great-great-grandfather like 2 episodes ago. Ray ended up meeting his younger self like did, and now in this particular episode, Rory ended up meeting his dad. Obviously get to that soon enough, but now it's like these anachronisms are getting a little too pinpointed. It's like these anachronisms are, because it makes it seem like all these anachronisms are revolving around them, because the weird thing is Jax just randomly picked this like anachronism, and it's like it just happens to be connected to you guys in particular. It's like, is that planned by Mollus? Is this what is that all about? Is it Mollus, or is there something or someone else kind of like sitting on the like stages of being like, oh yeah, like this kind of fits into the greater plan of this like whatever this is? Because to me, I went into the season, I barely remember everything that went down in the trailer, but I felt like, to me, it felt like there was someone in particular that kind of reigned over the timeline. I thought that was going to be introduced, but I don't remember. Maybe I like completely made that up. I feel like that was going to be the case, that there was someone out there in the timeline. But it's just so interesting, like, it just seems a little too coincidental that there can't be any coincidence with this, that the cases they've come across like have led them down these different paths like that in connections to themselves. They have importance to each other, they have connection to the legends. So like that was just such a fascinating thing that they never made much of a big deal out of. They just had Zari kind of bring that up, and they just dropped it. They never said anything else. I'm like, you're teasing some grand plot, and I really appreciate that. I really like that little wink and a nod. I'm like, oh, did you notice this yet? So another big thing about this episode is the whole Stein and Jax situation. Obviously, Stein is kind of making it seem like, well, he had figured things out, but even he's still having trouble figuring out how to properly separate Firestorm. Because in his case, he wants to separate Firestorm, but also make sure that Jax can still be a hero. Like, still be able to activate all of Firestorm's abilities by himself, which I might have brought this up last episode, but that was always a fascinating thing to me, is like what they wanted to do with Firestorm. Like, were they going to try and find him another half to transfer Martin's powers to? Because it's so interesting, because like, the common factor amongst both Firestorms has been Stein. He's kind of like one crucial part to it, so that's why they had to find Jax another half to him. But it's like, will Jax from here on be fully Firestorm, or will they find another half for him? I'm just curious to see what, I mean, like I said, it seems like they're making it so that he's just doing it by himself, but will they ultimately have no choice but to find a different replacement for Stein? Like, I mean, you can obviously transfer everything over to Jax, but would it be safer to transfer it over to another person? Like, would that be easier? Would that actually be harder? Is it because Jax is already part of Firestorm, like fusing them together might be a little dangerous, but it's a lot easier and simpler because of almost like a synchronization with his ability, that kind of makes it so. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm just like talking like, blowing hot air, like maybe there's nothing to that, but it does seem that they are setting Jax up to be like, Jax is kind of worried, because it's like, aside from being Firestorm, it's like, what do I really bring to the table? Obviously he's kind of like the main engineer to the team, but it's like he feels like if he's not Firestorm, what does he really bring to the table? And obviously he's going to Sarah for advice. Obviously she's in her coma and everything, but it's like, well, no, Sarah doesn't have powers. Like, she doesn't have like some awesome power or tech. She has her own skills, and she's still like the best of them all, so that's why this episode, obviously what he did with LBJ, saving him from those landmines, which was pretty cool, kind of showed Jax that like, oh, I can do this. That the fact is, I have to learn to do this without Stein. And then also kind of, if you see that look on Stein's face when he hears that too, because it's like, yeah, he wants to go back to his family and everything, be there for his son Ronnie, but it's still a situation of like, that still gotta hurt because it's like, you know, for you and Jax, like you're both connected. You have this connection. You have for such a long time now. And it's like, you're cutting that away from yourself. It cannot be the easiest thing. The thought of like, you know, it seems like he's okay with it because he understands what Jax is doing. I think he also, obviously he appreciates it too, but I think on some level it's a little hard for him too because it means saying goodbye to all of this. It means saying goodbye to Jax, like his other half, you know, it can't be easy, you know? So like I said, I'm curious to see where that whole situation goes as well. So, and then finally, the other thing that went down this episode was Mick and his dad. That actor who plays his dad, I've seen him in so many things. I don't know his name, but, I love Mick with being like, I don't want to be here because I'm going to end up running into my dad, which you have, Nate being like, what? There's like almost no chance. And it's like, boom, he ends up immediately running into his dad. The reason why he has problems with his dad is because, I mean, in actuality, it seems like he actually inadvertently killed his dad. Not directly, but obviously he burned down his house when he was a kid. We learned this about Mick back in like season 1. But when he ended up killing his dad because he left his dad in there to burn. But for Mick, his upbringing, the fact is his dad was kind of a drunk and smoked, you know, just, he was so focused on all of that. And just like, he never finished it, but he was basically like, the only reason my dad ever got up was to, and just stopped. I'd assume he beat Rory a lot. He was very abusive. So Rory grew up hating his dad. That's why he's spending this time right here hating him, even though they're so similar. The fact is they're fighting with both kind of like flamethrower weapons, them simultaneously spitting at the same time. They're rough, gruff personalities and stuff like that. But ultimately, you know, Mick kind of realizes his dad became like that because of his experiences in Vietnam. He brought them home and everything. He was actually kind of a very hopeful guy. Like, oh man, this is the woman I love. I'm going to go back. You know, I'd like to have a family one day, you know. And so now Mick feels guilty because it's like, I killed my dad. I'm the one that should have died. Because for him, he blamed his dad for everything. It's like, oh, my dad treated me the way I was treated. My upbringing made me into the monster that I am. All the bad things I've done. But now it's like, well, maybe I'm the real big monster amongst us all. At least his reasoning for becoming the way he wasn't by choice. He became a monster because of everything that he experienced, you know? So it put things kind of in a different perspective for Mick. And we also kind of learned about him burning himself on his arm. Has that ever come up before? I guess it's like Mick's version of like, you know, cutting himself. It's his way of dealing with everything. Like, I thought the burns on his arms were specifically from like, oh, his years of messing with fire, maybe like scars he got from way back then. But it's like, no, it seems like all the scars on his arms were self-inflicted. You know, maybe that's Mick's way of dealing with his pain. Anytime something hurts, anytime he feels any like sorrow or anything, or maybe deep-seated anger, he burns himself. It's, you know, his way of dealing with things, I guess. Maybe I'm completely wrong about that. But, you know, he obviously works alongside his dad, you know, even though his dad's like, you know, knocks Nate out and everything. He's like, are you coming? He's like, yeah. Because for him, it's like, if he sticks along with his dad, you know, he can make up for what he did in some shape or form. It's like, well, you know, it's like, my dad's right here. I might as well take this time to help him out and be there for him, you know, because I wasn't there. I wasn't a good son for him before. Like, let me try and do something to help out now. But I think it was also to keep him on the right path. He ends up doing it this episode because it's like, okay, you want to wipe out all these people because you're saying they're traitors and they're this and that. And it's like, you and your squad are about to kill them, but Rory stops him because it's like, if you do this, it's going to haunt you, and that it's going to take any part of you that is good, essentially, that is going to haunt you, and you want to start a new family, and it's going to follow you to that family as well. So, and then obviously Mick proceeds to knock him out because, well, that was kind of for himself, because it's like, well, you were kind of still a dick, you know, for me when I was growing up. So the question is, like, what does that mean for Mick? You know, he sent his dad back without doing all of that bad stuff. So that does beg the question, does that mean his dad is, like, does that mean Mick's life is going to change for the better? Because that's something Zari kind of taps into this episode too. And it's because I think it's kind of interesting because Mick ended up ratting her out about the whole Helen of Troy situation, which is like, I wonder, I don't know if, like, I would assume just because Rory's himself, he probably saw her do that. And it's like, oh yeah, like, she asked him to keep his mouth shut. Obviously he didn't. Because it turns into that whole situation of like, well, we have a time machine. Why can't we set history right? Why can't we do the right thing? It's like, well, messing with time is a delicate balance. Obviously, you know, it's kind of weird saying that the words delicate balance with the legends, because they're kind of more like a chainsaw than a chisel. Well, actually, I think the best example that was used was like, no, they're more like a hammer than a chisel. So I'm curious to see like whether that really means for them going forward, because obviously Zari feels the way she does, but obviously the legends have their way of doing things too, even though they have things they want to change as well. So it does beg the question of like, will they change their ways going forward about how they approach this whole time travel thing or not? Because it seems like the whole Zari situation seems like that's going to be something she's going to do going forward if she can change anything. Because for her, it's like, well, things are kind of wrong in time. Like, shouldn't we try and fix them? It's like, well, because that's kind of because they kind of keep the same mindset that the Time Masters have. Time Masters always are like, no matter what the situation is, we should kind of let things be, hence the whole like Vandal Savage situation. I mean, that kind of works in their own regard because that was kind of their own like, well, necessary evil, and they were working with it turns into that whole ugly situation because they were like, were they working for him, or was he a Time Master himself? I think he was a Time Master himself. But nevertheless, it's that situation. So it's like, I'm curious to see what they do about that. But obviously, like, Mick gives up to his lighter. So I guess that means him being like, no, like his reasoning for keeping that around is like no longer necessary. So I got to look back and see if he's done that more often. He probably has. I just don't remember him doing that a lot. I think there might have been a few times here and there, but I don't know if that's a big thing that's ever been pointed out about Mick before now. And obviously another big thing was obviously I brought up earlier the whole Maya situation with like, well, Grodd being a monster, but there being more to it than that. Kind of begs the question about Kuasa, her being the way she is, being the villain that she is, because in her mind it's like, well, she's a villain, I'm gonna take her down, but it's like she's your granddaughter, and there's got to be reasons. And I think I kind of brought this up before because obviously you had the whole Mari situation. Mari became a superhero, but then why did Kuasa become the way that she did? What events played out? Was it just her upbringing, or maybe it's a combination of her upbringing plus like maybe, being reached out by Mollis. He knew how to push what buttons, maybe, she had a rough upbringing and it just made her mad at just the world and her past, her family. So the question is like, what is she trying to do? Is she trying to rewrite her whole destiny? Is a question I'm curious about. Like, how does she ultimately get her abilities? So many questions. Like I said, overall, great episode, and it set up a lot of very interesting things that I'm curious to see how they continue going forward. Obviously, much like Flash, as well as Supergirl and Arrow, even though that won't be until Thursday I talk about it. But everything obviously is leading up to the crossover next week, which I've said countless times. We're about to say for the third time, and I guarantee you will hear me say it the fourth time. Just on the off occasion, anyone listen to these doesn't listen to the others, and that's fine. That's whatever. It's okay. I don't expect everyone to listen to me ramble on about TV shows and stuff like that. It's fine. I feel like a douchebag when I say it like that because it makes it seem like I do care too much. Nevertheless, so I'm excited to see where this all goes, what part the legends play and what goes down. Especially because if you see, like from the previews, it looks like it's this whole Crisis on Earth X situation. Obviously, this is kind of like a different Earth, but it kind of seems like it might fall in line with certain aspects that we've seen so far in Legends because it looks like there's people in armors and suits, and it looks like they might be dealing with Argus. So I'm curious to see how that like all ties in together, so, but even not just them, but everything else beyond that for the rest of the season, see where everything falls with that as well, especially with this army of bad guys that Mollis is building. So, and obviously what other connections we're going to see going forward for the legends, like I said, like all these anachronisms having, not all, but some of them so far having connections to the legends, what that means going forward. But really, that's all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, love life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.